Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, urgency of getting people back to work gives new momentum to micro-credentials. A new article by John Marcus in the Hechinger Report. Our question from a listener is part 2 of our West Coast liberal arts schools, such as Lewis and Clark, University of Puget Sound, Whitman. Worth it. Our interview is part 2 of 3 with Vince Garcia on what happened with admissions at UFC schools this year. And our college spotlight comes to you courtesy of Lisa, and it is Wake Forest University.
The funny thing in the intro, Dave was supposed to say Willamette, but he kept messing it up so many times.
That's
that
right.
He just cut Willamette out. He just said, forget it. I'll go with Whitman.
Willamette.
Yeah, after 18 errors. Don't feel bad. Lisa and I have done the same thing. It's all good.
It took me a week to get down A&T.
Yeah. And don't think I trust that you have it down. No, it's taking you 58 years and you don't have HBCU down. So that's what we're up against.
That's right. I said, sorry, folks. We just got to sort of, for all you Willamette alums,
there you go.
No offense. Yeah, our school is just too tough to pronounce.
It is all good. Listen, friends, thank you so much. We did have a nice surge of participants who completed our survey. Last week, we said we're going to start setting up some panel discussions with current students at certain colleges where you can ask them directly your questions. If you're considering as a student attending that particular school, or a parent, you want to learn about it, or a college counselor, you want to learn about it. And we said, we'll continue to keep the link in our show notes. We added our short 6-question survey to yourcollegeboundkid.com website under the resources tab. And it's still there. So we ask you to just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com under the resources tab, click, you'll see survey for all. And the most important question on there is, what schools would you be interested in us comprising a group of students so that you can ask them your questions. So we're going to keep that going for a few more weeks, and then we're going to start lining up some schools, and we'll see what type of attendance and participation we get. And if it's good, it's something we'll stick with. So we try different things. Some work, some don't. It's all part of what you do with the podcast. Some more good news. Lined up a couple more interviews this week I'll be doing in June, and I'm mentioning them to you because I'm also starting something new where I'm encouraging you to send your questions in. The questions don't have to come from me. They can come from you. So a few more interviews that I will be conducting in the month of June. One is with A.J. Howell-Williams, who's Senior Associate Director at Santa Clara University. So if you have questions about Santa Clara, send them in. And then also Andre Phillips, who we go back almost more than 15 years now, actually. He is the Director, Dean of Admission at University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's a very popular school. And so send your questions in about the Badgers, about anything. And you got to get them in soon, though, because these interviews, I'm lining them up, and I'm lining them up shortly. Now, you may not hear them until next April, because my new plan is to get all my interviews done in May, June, and July for the whole entire year. That's when it's easiest to get these professionals. And then one more is with an expert on medical school admission process. So if you have questions about how to get into medical school, anything about medical school admissions, send those questions in. All right, Dave.
I'm ready.
Dave is going to have our admissions tip this week. Now, listen, there's a saying, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then. And so talking to Dave, yeah, he was a blind squirrel. He said something profound a couple weeks ago. And I said, hey, Dave, can you share that for our tip of the week? He said, sure. So take it away, my friend.
You must be talking about the benefits of taking a gap year.
Yes, absolutely. You want to talk about your reflection after the gap is pretty much over?
I think so. Well, I do have to preface this that this was a gap year in the year of COVID. So we do know, Mark, that many more kids took gap years in COVID, and there were good reasons to take gap years. From a parental point of view, I didn't want to pay like 75 grand to have my daughter on a computer at home.
80. Well, I guess
80.
when you take away room and board, it wouldn't have been that high, but still it was a lot.
Well, to Yale's credit, they gave me back $3,500 on room and board for sending my daughter home early. To me, that barely covered the cost of the ticket and the storage fees. But thank you, Mr. Yale Registrar. I mean, I was able to afford my Starbucks for that week. But
okay, Mr. $3,500 Starbucks habit.
No, I'm Mr. Lincoln Penny. I'm a Dunkin'
I know.
Bag.
We know who you are. By the way, for those of you who are new, I have to give you the history of why I called Dave Mr. Lincoln Penny. So we would take
Dr.
trips
Lincoln
together.
Penny.
Dr. Lincoln. Let's get the doctor in there. We would take trips growing up as a family, and my dad would give us $2 to $3 for lunch. You say $2 to $3? I remember Dave and I were born in 1963. So if we're like, this is the 70s. But Dave, of course, he didn't want to spend his money on food. All the rest of us bought food. He put his money in his pocket and he hit us up for our food. Man, those fries look good. You feel like sharing? I noticed you're not done your burger. You want to toss it over here? So I have dubbed him the cheapest man in the world that would take Abraham Lincoln and push him off the penny. And he has embraced it as a badge of honor. Even when we do these podcasts, you put your name in on the when you go into Squadcast, so he types in Dr. Lincoln Penny instead of Dave Williams. So that's the history of that.
My daughter took a gap year this year, and it was just a really great experience for her. I mean, it was an opportunity for her to grow. It was an opportunity for her to expand. And, as a doctor, I think we really appreciate that kids' minds, their actual brains, do a lot of maturing between the ages of 18 to 21. And every subsequent year that they are allowed to actually take time off, as you will, from making the major decisions in life is a year that frontal lobe is allowed to mature, that their belief systems and their sense of who they are and their comfort zone, it's just allowed to gel. And the growth in my daughter, both in her sense of confidence and in her sense of direction, has been so tremendous. So that I see now she is so directed as she looks to going back to her second year, and she has a purpose and a focus that she would not have had if she had just gone straight through her sophomore year. So, Mark, a couple of things that she's done is she wanted to learn Spanish, and so she hooked up with your daughter, Karis, a wonderful tutor. And I don't know what they're doing, but all I know now is I go to their room and I see them chatting away in Spanish.
They really do. I can't follow a single word they're talking. And my daughter Karis has said, Lauren is smart. She's already up to Spanish 3 when she started, with nothing. So good for her.
Yeah, and the big joke is that I had actually paid for Karis to start me on Spanish lessons. But after Lauren, if she actually starts me, she'll figure out I'm so bad. She'll be like, maybe Lauren's adopted. This can't be your father. He's too dumb. But she was also able to start this political organization called the Young Vote. So you can go to theyoungvote.org and see all the things that she's done. And then she takes microeconomics courses and so forth. So typical, hyperachiever type of schedule. But more importantly, she really found a sense of herself. And I think that's is the greatest benefit of a gap year. So a gap year is not for everybody, but I do want to encourage parents and students that if you feel for whatever reason you just need a time to reset or refresh or just step away from the rat race or just pursue a passion or a skill set that you feel that college isn't providing for you right now, I am a great believer in a gap year to helping achieve those goals. So,
And a couple of things I'll add. When I look at the students I've worked with that have taken gap years, and I had 3 last year, there was a lot of fear of peer pressure on the part of parents. Like, what are you doing? And on students, there was the fear of like, I'm not going to be with the rest of my class. They're going to graduate ahead of me. And I'll just say, don't worry about that. That's a lot of white noise. Just completely ignore that. If it's something that you feel you need to do, by all means, do it. Just something creative to think about. If the shoe fits, wear it. All right, Dave, admissions vernacular. And because last week you got suitcase school, suitcase college, correct. I'm up in the ante a little bit. Net tuition revenue. What is net tuition revenue?
all right, we're going to break this down. We're going to figure this out. We're going to say, okay, net tuition revenue. All right. So
I know the name of it, my friend.
well, I just
making it longer doesn't increase your chances of getting it right, just so you know.
Okay, we just going to exercise a little bit of tactical analysis. So revenue, money coming in, tuition, got to deal with money from tuition coming in, and net means it's got to be you take away the expenses from the total revenue and you get the net revenue. So that's what your net tuition revenue is.
I don't think you know what you're talking about at all. I just think you're throwing stuff out there. I should have just called it, it's also known as NTR, but I didn't want to just say NTR on you. All right, I'm not giving you credit, even that you said technically the right things, but you didn't convince me you know what you're talking about.
I'm not even going to get half credit.
No, the definition of net tuition revenue is the amount of revenue or money that an institution receives from tuition after they take away financial aid. And financial aid is both need-based aid and merit-based aid. So here's an example. A school charges $30,000 for tuition. Once again, this is not room and board. This is not student fees. This is not non-billable expenses, just tuition. They charge $30,000, but the average student actually pays $15,000 by the time they take away need-based aid or merit-based aid. Then the net tuition revenue is $15,000. And it's an extremely important statistic that colleges use for budgetary purposes because it's your bottom line. The bottom line is not your published cost of attendance or your published tuition. The bottom line is the dollars you bring in.
That's what I said.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, that's what you tried to convince me you were saying by just saying net means this, revenue means this, tuition means this.
Look, dude.
I'm a hard grader, man.
I got my micro credential from the Trump School of Technical Analysis. That's exactly what I said.
You guys are going to know that little micro credential line in a second. All right, the big number. The big number is 66.7. And that is the average acceptance rate for the entire country. So Dave and I are often talking about it's a buyer's market out there. Don't get scared away by the hype of all these schools are impossible to get in. And Dave, I'm going to take you back all the way to the year 1977. The group
Disco
is Meatloaf.
Inferno.
Oh, man, that was good.
Wait. I know this Meatloaf song, man. I love you. I need you.
Chill, you're good.
Ain't no way I ever gonna. No, I want you. I need you, but there ain't no way I'm ever gonna love you. But don't feel bad, because 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Okay, you just made up for not. You just got up. You just made up for not getting admissions vernacular. 66.7% is 2/3.
That's right.
And that is the Meatloaf song.
That's right.
Remember, Davey?
Oh, I love
Baby,
Meatloaf.
we can talk all night, but
that
ain't getting us nowhere.
nowhere.
So don't skip ahead. So don't be sad, because 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And then to make the point that it's a buyer's market, what does the song say? I want you. I want you. I need you. That's what colleges are saying to your kid. I want you. I need you. So that's 60. And by now we've lost all audience, Dave. So let's get out of here. My kiddos have warned me. No more singing. You sound like a dead frog.
I know that Anika and Lisa are going to team up and get us into intervention.
And so are my kids. This is not one they will hear. Or my wife. They literally
right.
say you're a dead frog. You're hurting my ears. Stop it. I'm literally banned from singing in the kitchen, just so you know.
That's right.
Take away our article of the day. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
Alrighty, so we have a great article by John Marcus of the Hechinger Report, and it's on micro-credentials. The article is called "The Urgency of Getting People Back to Work Gives New Momentum to Micro-Credentials."
I have to stop for a sec, Dave.
Yeah,
I know you enough to know that you love this article.
That's
I'm
right.
on it. I know, but they'll let you do your thing. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop. First of all, what the heck is a micro-credential? A micro-credential are bite-sized chunks of education that are narrow in focus and shorter in duration than a university degree. And if you can choose the right one, they can give you the skills and or a certificate to help you bag the job you are looking for or help you attain the degree you eventually desire. So when we talk about this is a big article, Mark, so I'm actually going to give a brief summary, and then we're going to dive right into the things. So,
Hechinger Report, you got to expect to read 12 to 15 pages when I send you Hechinger Report one.
And there's so many great quotes, but I really do know that you want to dive into the quote. So here's my outline. It first talks about why are micro-credentials taking off? And it gives really 4 reasons. Number 1, money. Number 2, the growing skills gap. Number 3, the length of time it takes to get micro-credentials. And number 4, the graduation success of micro-credentials compared to traditional universities. And so, Mark, I'm just going to briefly throw some statistics out there. From 1989, the cost of a degree doubled. We all know that private education costs $75,000 a year, but the cost of a micro-credential degree, it can be as low as $160 per credit hour, while those of a traditional college is almost $600 per credit hour. But there's also a growing skills gap because, according to business leaders, only 11% of students have the necessary skills to adequately perform in their market. So they see a failure in traditional education in adequately preparing kids for the job market. And then the Hechinger Report really takes a point in time to saying that because of COVID, a lot of people are out of work and they only have money saved up for maybe 2, 3, 4 months maximum. But many of these micro-credentials you can get in less than 10 weeks' time, and they are tailored to real-life needs. So if you need to learn how to code, you can learn how to code specifically for this job and get that job. And then the main other thing it points out is the graduation success. That micro-credentials are really grown out of the failure of traditional education to adequately prepare many of its students to even get the degrees that they've paid up for. 25% of current students quit after the first year. Only 40% of students get degrees after 6 years. There are 36 million dropouts who have gone to college with absolutely nothing to show for it. But meanwhile, 70% of students getting degrees at micro-credentialing institutions such as EDU or WGU, Western Governors University, finish in 2 years because many of them can get up to 27 credit hours for their previous work experience. So I'm going to stop there, Mark, and say, let's talk about micro-credentials.
Yeah, and I think Dave, you meant to say edX, not EDU, but fantastic, fantastic intro and summary. So this to me is really, really exciting. In fact, I think this is the future. I think this is the future 50 years from now. Now, the article talks about one thing that's been difficult to get micro-credentials to take off is just understanding the concept. People don't get it that easy. You can't just send flyers out and people don't get it. But I'll break it down. What they're talking about, for the most part, is what they also refer to as a stackable bachelor's degree. It's a stackable bachelor's degree. And so you take these certifications and you get skill sets that make you more marketable. They can increase your salary. They can lead to raises. And ideally, they don't have to lead to bachelor's, but that's the ideal. And what edX is trying to do along with Western governors, those are the two big ones right now, although others are emerging quickly. For example, BYU is launching a very, very similar type program, and the University System of Georgia is trying to do something very similar right now on the associate's degree level. But the idea is you get this skill that increases your pay, that's practical, that employers want. You can get this certification in 2 to 3 months. And what's so good about it is it keeps people motivated because it's a short-term commitment. They see the value of what they're getting. They see the correlation to job pay and raises. And the dropout rate is so low because you're constantly getting positive, reinforcement. And what the article does is it compares it to a traditional bachelor's degree where after 6 years, you still have over 40% of people graduating with nothing. And the point it makes here is with these stackable degrees and stackable credentials, and by the way, edX is it's courses that were created by both MIT and Harvard combined to do massive online, MOOC, massive online open course to the masses of people. And the CEO of edX coined the term micro bachelors. He actually trademarked it. And they've launched one already in computer science. You take these mini little stackable courses, and at the end of the day, you end up with a degree into computer science. And now they've added 3 more in writing, marketing, and data science. And they're expanding them even more. But the idea is with you go for the traditional bachelor's, if you drop out, you have nothing. You just have a lot of debt and no degree. But with the stackable bachelor's, you're still marketable, just maybe not at the same degree as the bachelor's. And so because they also cost a lot less too, because this is online. And so the difference in per credit hour is significantly less. I mean, the article showed the difference in cost. It was like 166 a credit hour as opposed to well over 500. So you're talking about a third of the cost, constant reinforcement, shorter bursts, so it's easier to hold people's attention. People are seeing the return for their labor. And as Dave mentioned, they're doing some really creative things. For example, Western Governors is giving you 27 credits starting out for your life experience. Now, mind you, this is assuming this is probably somebody in their 30s or 40s or maybe even the 20s. You can't be a 16-year-old and just come in with 27 credit hours for your life experience all 16 years, But Dave, what do you want to say about what I've said, or anything else I haven't said?
Oh, well, I want to expand to that. Yes. So let's talk about the credit hours. What these institutions like Western Governors have done, which is really smart, is they realize that those 36 million dropouts are part of their customer base. So if you've gone to college and you did 2.5 years or 3 years or maybe 1.5 years, and you think all those hours are a waste, they allow you to apply some or much of the time that you've already dedicated towards that degree. So it's a great way for people who have dropped out of the system to reintegrate into the system. And I thought that was amazing. I really thought that it's an indictment of our current university system. I mean, when you mentioned in your last podcast that for a private institution, pre-tax, it's $500,000.
I mean, the most expensive ones.
The most expensive ones, okay. So even if you're talking about, they mentioned $100,000 on average. I mean, that's really devastating to think that you would spend that type of money and not get something. But more importantly, we also talk about this concept of being a lifelong learner.
Exactly.
That any education that we get is by definition going to be obsolete incredibly quickly unless it's refreshed and updated. One of the examples that I read about was if you're in computer coding, and let's say you know how to code for Windows, and then all of a sudden your company switches and says, we need to code for Android. Well, you're not going to go back to MIT or to Urbana and learn coding when you can take a micro course that's going to take your existing skill set and tweak it or give you the ability to change that Microsoft coding to Android coding. So this is all the things that micro-credentials does. It helps people get back into the system, and it helps people with existing skill sets keep their skill sets relevant for the changes of today and tomorrow.
Yeah, and this is hot, by the way. So if you look at edX, like I mentioned, the program created by MIT and Harvard, their enrollment increased 14-fold from March to April of last year. 65,000 more people came on, 14-fold increase. So there's clearly is a demand for this. And they're starting to expand into more and more different courses. Western Governors has created a partnership with Nevada, the state of Nevada, and they're rolling this out for teachers and special courses in leadership and other skill sets. And they're doing some smart things, like if you complete these courses, you're getting a $5,400 bonus automatically. And so they're starting to link it really directly to the workforce. But I really think, Dave, now let's face it, the traditional bachelor's of arts, bachelor's of science, that's not going anywhere. It's been around for hundreds of years. Neither is living on a residential campus for some people, because that can be a transformative experience, and it's not going to be for everybody, but that's not going to become obsolete.
Yeah. But
things do change over time. And to me, this concept of the stackable bachelors, I really think, and 50 years from now, this could be a complete total disruptor.
Yes.
Because if you look at all the pros to this, you're getting credentialed along the way.
Yep.
So you're getting proven marketable skills that are valuable. That increases your motivation. That increases your incentive to stick with it, because you're seeing the fruit from your labor. Another thing is, when you're an employer and you're trying to get talent out there, I mean, if you can dip into someone that's getting these certifications and they now have skills that you feel can come in and do the job, and there's always going to be an element of learning on the job. Like, you're going to learn some things from being on the job. It could be a great way for you to get your hooks in on some real talented people early. And then you could build your incentive structure and say, listen, we'll pay you at this rate now for these credentials. You finish the stackable bachelors, and you'll get the $20,000, $30,000 raise, or whatever the number is. But there, one of the reasons why a lot of employers like to do programs like co-ops and internships is so that they can get their hooks and digs in on talented kids really early and make them an offer before their competition gets at them. And I see this as another thing that could be really attractive to employers. You're going to say something, Dave?
Yes, and I did want to make this distinction that I think is very important that the article makes between a certificate and certification, and why certification is actually what the employers are really finding very attractive. A certificate is simply a statement awarded at the completion of a course of study. So, I mean, you watched a video, you attended a class, your posterior was actually on a seat for X amount of hours, and it says you were there, you completed a test, but it's not a guarantee that you actually know the skill sets that the course was teaching. Certification, on the other hand, is usually given by an industry association or union to certify that you have the skills to do a certain task. For example, I get certifications in advanced life support or in advanced trauma life support. And one of those is that you know how to do certain things, like you know how to intubate, like putting a tube down the throat. If you need to help some people breathe, you know how to operate a defibrillator to shock someone to life. So you actually, not that you've just attended the course, but you know the skills of the course. And in the context where only 11% of businesses feel that kids have the skills to be competent at the jobs that they require, that's very appealing to businesses, the certification aspect of it.
Yeah, but I think that the other thing that's great just about the certifications is that they're so linking what they do to skills that the workforce needs, right?
Absolutely.
So this is not like theoretical abstractions in a lab somewhere. By the way, every now and then you do show you went to Princeton and Harvard, man. Most people just say their butt or their ass. You're like, my posterior.
Wow.
Your posterior's on a seat,
That's because I have my Chicago crudeness, and I just don't want it to bump up against your Atlanta genteel sensibilities.
Well, credit for adjusting. That was a good comeback. That was a
But
good comeback.
if you want me to substitute posterior for the A word, we can do that.
Oh, you're hilarious. But no, you can see I'm very excited about this. This to me could really be the future for 50 years from now. But even if it doesn't, even if the stackable bachelor's doesn't end up replacing the traditional bachelor's, to the extent to which programs like these give people marketable skills, they're so flexible because you could have a union job and you're working an assembly line and you don't really see any path to getting a bachelor's, but you've got a family of 3 or 4 and you're trying to take care of them. But the idea of taking a 2 to 3 month course and upgrading a skill, and then getting an extra $3,000 to $5,000 on your salary as a result of it, that can be incredibly attractive, whether or not you pursue the full degree or not.
And Mark, I got to say that, I mean, this is not so relevant for our podcast listeners because for the most part, our listeners and our kids are such high achievers. But, I work on the south side of Chicago where in many schools, the graduation rate from high school is less than 50%. And the idea of most of these kids to get any type of degree is just inconceivable. It's like they can't, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Well, they can't see themselves getting to 10, 15 steps. But if you went to many of these kids and says, okay, don't worry about the college degree. Don't even worry about city college. Would you be interested in a 10-week course that can get you a job to see you through the summer and pay your rent? I think that's a way of getting many kids into the educational system who have totally been disregarded to this point. So when I read this article, that's the potential I saw in it.
Well, that's why I said I know you're going to love it.
Yeah.
Because Dave and I often talk. He's so close to the inner city where he lives, works, and his properties and people. He has a lot of Section 8 properties that people live in. So it keeps him close to sort of what's kind of happening in the hood. He often thinks from their perspective, like, what's going to take this kid who I cannot see going off and getting a 4-year degree? What is going to take them to a more sustainable life? And he thinks that way, where I'm a little more removed from that. And so I appreciate the perspective he brings. And so that's why I knew this would resonate with you, because it's something that you could see could really be applicable to a lot of people. And it's true for rural America also.
Yeah.
And it's true for blue collar. I think it really transcends race and, geographical location. It just has a lot of appeal because the white collar person can just upgrade their credentials and go from maybe making 90 to 95. But the other person that's maybe working at Walmart and doesn't want to be stuck at Walmart for 10 years or maybe even unemployed, this can, like you said, get them in the education system. And I think it's really important that we have a broad view of education, that we don't just think education equals college degree. No, education is anything that's growing and stretching your mind. So you want to make one final comment and then put a bow on it, Dave?
Yeah, I do want to make one final comment. So often in our podcast, we talk to kids and parents who are going to do great no matter where they go. And what they're really trying to do is go from a solid school to one that's exceptionally difficult to get into. And we know that the difference between that is not truly going to be transformative to their life. It might have some added benefits, but it's not going to change their trajectory because they already have so much going for them. But when you have kids who their option is to have no income whatsoever, to have no education whatsoever, to have no middle class skill sets whatsoever, and then you can get them into anything that can get them into that 30, 40, 50, 60,000 a year job range, that's truly transformative because it saves not just them, but their future family potential and so much the social ills that we have to deal with in society. So that's my little talk about why I think that micro-credentials have far more potential impact on our society than getting kids into Ivy League college.
No, and that's how the article really starts. Like, it really profiles a blue collar worker like that. And it draws an analogy to almost like going to a food court and buying items, individual side items. Like you get your onions and you get your mushrooms and you get your cinnamon apples or you get your caramelized bananas and at a diner. And it profiles this lady named Amy Nelson. And it goes on to say that's what she's learned to do with micro-credentials. And so it starts out kind of using more of a blue-collar example. So let's close with that. So thanks, Dave. It's time for a question from one of our listeners. Okay, Lisa, we are down to the top two.
The top two.
So now I'm just going to count down the top five down. So in fifth place, we had Stanford. In fourth place, we had Michigan, Ann Arbor. Third place, Cornell. Number 2, Harvard University, Cambridge, Mass.
Wow, I'm surprised Harvard is
number two. Number 2. I mean,
that's got to rankle the people at Harvard.
Yeah. They'd probably say, check out our MBA.
That's right.
So now we'll have to see next week the big rollout for number 1. I will say this. Cornell had 10. Harvard had 12. One hint, the top school, 14 CEOs. 14 CEOs.
It's a lot of suspense.
Yeah. People are wondering, what is it? It's not Harvard. It's not Stanford. It's not Princeton. What is it? Stay tuned next week. The one thing that I would probably disagree with you about a little is I find Occidental has a lot of national stature. Like I get asked about it from all over the place. I get asked about it from families in New England, families in the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast and Southwest. I find that Williamette and Whitman and Puget Sound and Lewis and Clark fly under the radar a lot more. But Oxy, I think it's partly because it's in Los Angeles, and that gives it an appeal. And it's also incrementally more selective than some of those schools. So it's probably a combination of both. But what are your thoughts? I almost said Anika. I knew I was going to do it. I caught myself.
Well, it's early days yet, Mark. It's okay.
Oh, my goodness. So, Lisa, what are your thoughts? I know you and I share the same philosophy because we've talked about families just breaking the bank before when they could go to great schools and get merit money. And I know in your situation, I know you employed a merit money strategy.
Yes,
so what are your thoughts?
Well, I think there might be a very few cases, exceptional cases where it would make sense for that particular student to break the bank. But that's probably going to be the exception rather than the norm. Elizabeth is concerned that Anna is not going to meet interesting, smart people at these schools or be challenged. But I really think that there are smart people everywhere and there are smart kids everywhere. And, it's just more of talking to people and finding out, number one, like grades and test scores or even extracurriculars, that's not necessarily an indication of how intelligent a person is or, that they might have a different type of intelligence that would be valuable. I spend all day talking to people. So I talk to people from all walks of life. And some of the smartest people that I have ever met have had no formal education. Probably the smartest guy I ever met he was a truck driver. He was 70 years old. And, but I was just amazed about the insights that came out of his mouth and the way he could just really conceptualize things. So I think that Anna's going to be fine at these schools. They're going to have smart kids. She's going to have a great time. I think the academic quality will probably be reasonably comparable to, some of the East Coast schools. And so unless there's a really compelling reason, I would look for merit.
Yeah. And when you look, there's just no question in my mind. A number of these schools have programs where you need to have theses and have an outstanding study abroad options. If you look at Oxy, it's patterned after Princeton, right? Founders of Princeton moved to the West Coast. That's why you see the orange and black. That's why they're called the Tigers. And that's why they have something that Princeton has, which is every undergraduate student has to do an undergraduate thesis. It's a highly academic environment. Whitman has long been a favorite of mine. I struggle at times getting it on people's lists because people work off the assumption, if I haven't heard of it, it must not be any good. But if I'm in the Pacific Northwest, everybody's heard of those schools. And another one is Reed that you didn't mention. Reed is highly academic. I just had a student select Reed over a bunch of schools, including Northeastern, Davidson, University of Georgia, University of Rochester, a bunch of other schools as well, East Coast schools, because they took a trip out there and they were blown away by the caliber of the academics. And it is a complete pipeline into the University of Chicago. Like University of Chicago, Regis sends people to University of Chicago in droves for graduate and professional schools. There's another highly academic school out there on the West Coast. But, there are unbelievable schools. And if you're in the Pacific Northwest, people know those schools. It goes back to that local prestige. They really do. They know those schools much, much more so than they know, Franklin and Marshall and Denison and Dickinson and Bates and Colby and Hamilton. They just don't know those schools. Like, I think your librarian knowledge is exceeding the average person, and so much so it may be giving you a skewed sense of how much those schools are household names.
Right. And I think, too, there's a lot of research that says that if you take a kid and you put them in a situation where they're kind of like at average or slightly below average, they actually end up having lower self-esteem. And if you take a kid who's sort of more at the top of the situation, they're at the top third of their class, they come out of school feeling really confident, and they've probably been confident throughout their classes, and they actually do better in life. So, I think that's something that's important to consider.
I'm really glad you shared that. See, we're already getting these psychological insights, these little tidbits that are invaluable from a resident psychologist. But this is something I'm actually very cognizant of when I'm working with students. I find this a lot. I work with a lot of families that are scraping to get into the most selective and prestigious school they can get into. And sometimes I'm concerned, especially when they're interested in pre-med, because I know what that pre-med culture is like at some of these schools that only take the top 1 or 2%. And it can be grueling because you have so many type A's that feel so much pressure to at least get a 3.5, if not a 3.6, 3.7. And you're taking really hard classes like, inorganic, organic chemistry, general chemistry, these kinds of classes that are hard. And you're in there, and sometimes the classes are bigger. And I see so many people that I know that Anna's not necessarily interested in medical field, but it's my illustration I still think applies, so I'm going with it. But I was having a conversation with a student, pretty recently, not a student, with a college counselor, in Arkansas, and we were talking about this whole concept of what's called overmatching. Like, there's a lot of talk about undermatching. That's someone that maybe settled for a school when they could have had more selective options, but there's not a lot of talk about overmatching. And overmatching is a reality, especially when it comes to, med schools and things like that. And we were talking about how, so-and-so and so-and-so, a couple of people we know, we think if they hadn't gone to a couple of the more grueling schools, they would have ended up being doctors, and they weren't. So now, listen, I know that Anna's 4.0. She's done well. I'm sure she could go well and do well at any of these schools. But I agree with Lisa. Like, self-esteem is extremely valuable, and it is easier to have self-esteem if you may be more in the top quarter of the student body. But don't think that those schools don't have really smart kids, because they do. They have very smart kids, and they have incredible programs, incredible curriculums, incredible professors. I just think it's mostly, honestly, the single biggest thing. If you took those schools and you put them on the East Coast, there would be more name recognition for them, and I really think that's it. So I think you're really on the right path. I think you've identified a lot of schools that would be fantastic. And I 100%, if I were you, would be looking at the merit money approach, because, you can get a really, really good school for $40,000 or $45,000. You really can, 40, 50, 35, 50, 30 to 50 in that range, especially a 4.0 student. You can get fantastic schools at that price point. So why pay double? And keep in mind what you're actually paying with taxes. Mm-hmm. So I think you're absolutely on the right path. And I wouldn't second guess it for a minute. And quite honestly, Karis wouldn't have gone to Davidson. Karis got a really nice scholarship from Davidson, and Joy got a really nice scholarship from UGA. So I've shopped with value in mind. That's the approach that I take with my own kids, is where can you get the best bang for your buck, knowing you're probably looking at grad school, professional schools, and there's other things to think about like retirement, and there's other aspects of education, including traveling internationally and other things that you can do to provide enrichment as well. So keep on doing what you're doing, Elizabeth. I think you're on the right path. Any final comments, Lisa?
Well, I just wanted to say that I see this happen a lot where like families want to go for the most prestigious school, the most selective school. And maybe the kid would be better served at a different school. that's really good for their major, but isn't like a household brand name. And the student goes through this incredibly stressful process of applying to like a big time school. And if they got rejected, then they feel bad about themselves. And sometimes I wonder, why do that? Why not just go to the place, that you feel like it's a really great fit, that has really good program for your major, and just kind of not do that. I think our society is so competitive and we put so much competition on young people, and it just makes life harder than it has to be.
Yeah, and one thing that I do when I'm working with the family, honestly, I want to see the student get more acceptances than denials. I just do, for that reason, because I found really, really good students who are incredible. They can feel like they're just beaten down if they like get in 2 schools and they get, denied at 5 and waitlisted at 2 or 3. They just don't feel good about themselves. And so I like to look, I'm all for having some stretch goals on your list, especially if they're in your price point. But I think that's really important. And this is another thing I'm going to say. This is going to be really, really hard. And it's something we all need to do. But as parents, we also need to ask ourselves, like, how much of it is our own ego and how much of it is we would feel really good if we're able to say to people who we know, like, our kid is at so-and-so, and then eyebrows are raised and people are like, wow, they got in there. That's amazing. Like, that's a temptation that all of us struggle with. And I think it's not something that a lot of times people are honest with themselves and how it can impact the parent view, wondering how it will be perceived in their parent circles.
Absolutely. I think Stephen Antonoff, who is a very, I guess, popular independent educational consultant, said, you want a bumper sticker? I can get you a bumper sticker to any school in the world for $5. You can put it on your car if that makes you feel any better, but you really need to look for the best fit for your student. Yeah.
And one of my person actually going to replace me, what I'm doing now at Westtown School, doing college counseling, was back meeting with him, and he's also done college admissions at a lot of places, including Swarthmore and a bunch of other places. And he's like, Mark, I can give students these incredible schools that would be unbelievable matches. He says, but I have a question. Will they wear the T-shirt? Will they wear the T-shirt? Because if I can't get them to put the T-shirt on,
there's no point.
Yeah, then I'm just going to be like, whistling in the wind. And of course, it's a lot harder when you're in. I've noticed it's a lot harder in certain circles. Like if I'm working with students in prestigious private schools, boarding or day, or affluent suburbs, there's just so much pressure that kids feel from peers that there's like this very short list of acceptable names. And I feel for kids coming out of, at least, you and I were talking about that earlier today.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's really tough. It's tough being a kid now.
It is. It's like, it's tough. And then you turn around and that's why you're a client. That's why so many people want to see you, because they have so many psychological
it
problems.
It works for me financially, but it's terrible for me emotionally.
Yeah. You got to carry all those problems with you.
Yeah, seriously.
Well, Elizabeth, hopefully we gave you some good advice. I think you're absolutely on the right path. If I were you, I would be going for that merit, and I would come to realize how great those classes are. And there's some things you can do to test them, by the way. You can do things like have your daughter sit in classes. You can look up the faculty bios and then go read what students say in places like Rate My Professor about the professors themselves. And those are just a couple ideas amongst many others that you can do to test the quality. But let us know what you decide. Send a follow-up. We want to know. You left us with a cliffhanger.
Hear where she ends up.
Yes. Awesome.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, in part 2 with Vince Garcia, we talk about how major matters in the UC system. We talk about how college major matters. We also talk about how some UCs prioritize students coming right from their own backyard over others that are coming from other parts of the state or other parts of the country. And then we talk about the community college pipeline to the California universities. Listen and enjoy. What's the perception in California right now of getting into UCs? Like, how would you describe the climate, the word on the street? You know what I mean? The zeitgeist. I mean, you've been there, now since the 80s.
I think that for the middle class, the families where the income range, they have limited resources for college, there's a panic because you could have an overall UC GPA of above, I think it was, when I was talking to someone from the University of California recently, one of the schools, they said that 14,000 of their applicants had perfect grades.
Yeah, that's what people don't understand. So, Vince, just picking up on what you were talking about, one of the UCs literally having 14,000 perfect grades. I mean, it absolutely floors people. And the purpose of this, by the way, is not to discourage people. I always think about this listener in New York who loves our podcast and she wrote in and says, I listened to your podcast because some of the other ones were stressing me out so badly. And yours didn't do that. I feel like this is maybe doing that. So we're going to obviously give some positive advice and not just make it sound like it's like almost impossible to get in, but we do want to also do a little bit of a reality check also. But, USC has been saying now for a while when their admission officers travel and I interact with them that their average admit last year had one non-A on their transcript.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that freaks people out. And that you have to be careful when you say that because someone hears that as, so if I have 2 non-A's, I'm not getting in. And not necessarily. But it does let you know the combination of the competitiveness of the pool and some of the grade inflation that we've seen over the last 30 years.
Yes, and I would say again, if you go back to the article, and the director at UC Irvine says, and it's very clear, business administration, nursing science, computer science, and psychology, that B could make the difference.
Yeah.
But if you were doing Middle Eastern studies and you had 2 Bs and you were studying Arabic, there might be some room for you because they're paying for, 6 to 8 professors teaching Middle Eastern studies.
So here's the question that inevitably generates, Vince, which is, how can I, as a parent, know that? Because clearly what you're telling me is for UCs, your major, or at least your college, would you say your major or your college makes a difference?
I would say your major makes a difference and the college in which it's in makes a difference as well. So if
both end. Yep.
Yes, both. So computer science and engineering are the toughest. Arts and sciences can be challenging as well because that's where most of the applicants are. But if you can establish a fluency, you can't just say, I want to do Middle Eastern studies, and there's no connection anywhere in your activities, in your involvement, even in your essays. I think you have to explain yourself and say, where did this come from, and why is this a passion?
I'm really glad you brought that up because that inevitably happens, right? When we're talking to our students and they find out, okay, what are the undersubscribed majors? Or undersubscribed colleges or, majors often, because that's what I want to put on my application. And then you have to explain, well, admissions officers can suss that out. In fact, you want to share a story of that at all? I'm sure you could draw off your experience of,
yes,
of being able to see right through someone claiming that they wanted to be something they weren't. Why don't you give us an anecdote?
Well, I would say that the best anecdote is somebody who did it, who actually was able to establish the fluency. But when I first met with them, which is near the end of their junior year, they didn't even realize that was a possibility. So the reason that I mentioned Middle Eastern or Near Eastern studies is their family was from the Middle East. They were fluent and they had a lot of activity involvement in their Christian Coptic church, but they were fluent in Arabic. And every summer they went back and we began to make ties through the UN and UNESCO. We found a course. And then they saw the possibilities. Like they wanted to go, ultimately, I think they wanted to be a doctor, but they realized that there were significant health needs. And so we started to create some language and activities that would show that this person is moving towards that goal of serving a population that there's extreme poverty in different parts of the Middle East. And they were able to demonstrate that. So what was interesting to me is they didn't even realize that it was a possibility that they could link their culture and their passion for a particular subject to make and apply in an area where if they had applied in biology or psychology, it would have been less successful than what they wanted to say. But you still, when you're pre-med, all you have to do is take the classes. You don't have to be a biology major. You don't have to be a chemistry major unless you really want to.
Absolutely. So kind of summarizing some of the things that have changed this year. One of the things is more of a focus on math.
Yeah.
You're hearing that back? More of a focus on major.
Yeah.
And college and major. And just so little wiggle room for lapses in 10th and 11th because in some cases, maybe you could be buttressed by a higher score. And someone might say, well, this kid's got potential. Maybe they're a late bloomer. So we'll overlook, that non-A grade. But now without the scores, just even greater degree of scrutiny on grades, grade trends, courses taken, and then really every other aspect of the application as well. And a surge in out-of-state apps.
Yes.
A surge in out-of-state applications. So those are anything else I didn't cover in some of the big changes you observed?
I think the other thing that I would say that would be important for people who are thinking about applying in the future is to really think about, we're here in April and I have 6 months before I'm about to apply. What are the things that I can do to strengthen my commitment to the area I want to study in? The commitment that I'm making right now, because a lot of them are choosing their classes. I went right back to the profile and I showed them, this is, you can type it in Google, type in the name of your school and school profile, and it pops up, and then just look at, where can you stretch and press yourself and develop a schedule where you can be successful, but also demonstrate some rigor. So for me, you still have 6 months to make improvements. And I've seen, just as that person I mentioned, she didn't even realize that she could major in those areas until we had a conversation. And I showed her, this is your path to medical school that's going to make you stand out through the whole process, because nobody's talking about the Middle East and how can I improve healthcare to millions of people in the Middle East. For her, it just got her excited. So it was easy to create that, but she didn't even know it existed because nobody had helped her to make those connections.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
A recommended resource for episode 174 is the book Robot Proof. And the subtitle is Higher Education in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And it's written by the current president of Northeastern University, Joseph Aoun. Now, in the past, automation was considered a threat to the low-skilled labor worker. But now, many high-skilled functions, such as doing legal research, interpreting medical images, analyzing data, are all within the skill set of machines. And how can higher education prepare students for their professional lives when professions themselves are disappearing? In the book Robot Proof, Northeastern President Joseph Aoun proposes a way to educate the next generation of college students to invent, create, discover, to fill the needs of society. Even the most sophisticated AI cannot interrupt. A robot-proof education, Aoun argues, is not only concerned with topping off students' minds with high-octane facts. Rather, it calibrates them with creative minds and the mental elasticity to invent, discover, and create something valuable to society. In the book, Aoun covers the 3 skill sets that are essential if you want to robot-proof yourself. We will now return to my interview with Vince Garcia. So I want to go back to something I alluded to before, but never really pressed you on. So we've established major matters.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine all of our listeners saying, okay, well, how do I know what the more difficult majors are at different schools? I understand I can't just, be an imposter and pretend I'm somebody I'm not. But maybe if I know that school's got a very, very difficult admit rate for a particular major, maybe I won't apply there, or maybe I'll adjust my expectations. Besides that, what's your advice to someone how they can know what the more difficult majors are at respective UC schools?
I think that if you look at the article, which I'm sure you'll put a link up and people can see the article, but they're very clear. It's, business, nursing science, psychology, communications. They tell you what the 6 are. And I would say across the board for the UCs, those are popular majors. I would also say that you could Google, what are the most popular majors in the United States, and whatever is most popular in the United States is likely to be popular at the college level. And you really want to think about, if you have an interest in one of those, how can I make myself stand out in those groups? And then I think it's so important because, just this morning I was working with a student and they were expressing an interest in business and economics, but we had to have a conversation about their math grades. And then I showed them a school where they have an intense interest in the arts, not performing, but sort of, I would say, arts administration, which includes some business classes. And I say, this is a way that you can do what you want to do. You want to study business, but do it in a context that's appealing to you. So I always ask students, let's look at Wisconsin. Let's look at Indiana. Let's look at UCLA and see what the majors are. And then ask yourself, wow, I didn't even know that was available. And if you can establish an interest and a passion in that particular area and take yourself off that path of those 6 majors where you may not be as strong, I think you do yourself a favor.
And how do you account for sort of local strength in that assessment? So like for example, UCSD, right? Really strong computer science engineering, right?
Yes.
Is it Irvine? I think it's Irvine. Don't they have the really strong real estate business program?
Yes.
So some of this there's general majors that are what's true in the United States is true everywhere. But then there's local schools that are known for certain majors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Any advice for people on that?
Well, it's interesting because there is a higher acceptance rate for school context and local school context. So Santa Barbara and San Diego, you can have a slightly lower GPA, maybe course count, if you're from the area. But UCLA and Berkeley, which are more national universities, don't have any local context push, except for significantly disadvantaged economic areas. There might be a little bit more of a push.
Explain that a little bit, Vince. I think not everybody may be following how eligibility in local context, the local push, how that works. You want to flesh that out a bit?
Sure. So at the University of California, Santa Barbara, Davis, UC San Diego, they feel that it's really important to be committed to the local community. And so students who are within, 20 to 30 miles of the campus, basically San Diego general, can be slightly less competitive than somebody applying to, let's say, UC San Diego from Long Beach. And the same is true. UC Davis, their local context is much broader. It's almost the Central Valley because they have a very strong agricultural school, and most of their students will be coming from there. So they give a slight push to students who are within their local context. So it makes a difference. The more national schools, as I said, UCLA and Berkeley, with the exception of economic areas. So if you were applying to Berkeley and you were from Oakland or Richmond, you might get a little bit of a push because the number of students going to four-year universities from the high schools in that area is very low. So if you have all A's, you have all the rigor or a lot of the rigor the school offers, and you have maybe a slightly lower GPA, if you were applying to Berkeley and you were in their service area, you would be a good candidate for that particular institution, for Berkeley.
So what do you see as sort of competitive grades going down, looking at the UCs? Like what would be a GPA 10th and 11th, and I know there's lots of other factors. You have to be so careful when you say this, especially when schools are holistic, that you would say, maybe we may not want to look at that school?
I would say that you'd have to have a weighted GPA at least 3.6. And depending on what you were telling me you were interested in majoring in, it might be higher.
Mm-hmm.
So if I had somebody who was interested in computer science, I would say your grades have to be right on point. There has to be the rigor, and you have to demonstrate fluency in both programming, languages, and math.
Yeah, let's try to have some optimism here, because this is kind of dour. I can see some people being discouraged. So one thing I think, and you and I have talked about this, alternative pathways. Why don't you talk about how the community college system flows into the UCs and CSUs and how they respect those community colleges, and there can be a really great opportunity to come in through that angle. Do you want to talk about that? Because I know you and I off air have talked about how a lot of times you're better off transferring into a UC from a community college versus trying a 4-year school.
Right. And nobody, well, I can't say nobody, but a lot of other states' systems have emulated what has been true since the 60s here in California. And when they created the higher education system, CSU and UCs, they felt that they wanted to give multiple opportunities for California students to enter into the system. So what they did is, through community colleges, if you can apply after your first or second year, and there are different programs where if you take certain classes, you're automatically eligible for admission to the University of California or to a CSU. It's sort of interesting. I mean, they do make publicly the information about how to get in from high school, but I think for transfer students, there's a lot of support on community colleges about getting the information to them and helping students recognize that the first 2 years of your college education is general education. So they make sure that you cover a lot of the general education classes and that you have a plan in terms of your major. And once you complete that successfully after generally 2 years and you apply in November, it's almost a flawless system. And for instance, Santa Barbara City College, which is right next to UC Santa Barbara, the number of students transferring from SBCC to UC SB is quite strong because they've created a pathway that if you follow it, you're going to generally be admitted, and you have a higher admissions acceptance rate than if you were applying from San Francisco, for instance.
Great. So that's an option for people, certainly. Use that pipeline. Now it's time for our college spotlight of the week. All right, friends, we're in for a treat. Lisa is back. And today she will be sharing Wake Forest that she recently visited. And I haven't been to Wake Forest in about 13 years. So I'm really interested to get her feedback from her recent visit there. And it's nice having her now in North Carolina. We can still get her Midwest knowledge from her past experience, but she's getting out and getting to a lot of these campuses, in the North and South Carolina right now. So Lisa, share what's on your heart.
All right. Well, Wake Forest University is located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and that's sort of in the Greensboro area of North Carolina. And it's a mid-sized school. It's got about 5,200 undergraduate students. And Wake Forest has long been known as one of the most prestigious liberal arts institutions in the South. And on my recent visit, I could easily see why. A couple Fridays ago, I had a real itch to get out of working in my basement. So I hopped in the car and drove the hour and a half to Wake Forest. And as I started to approach the campus, about 2 miles away from the campus, I noticed things in Winston-Salem changed remarkably. So there was just one after the other of these beautiful mansions with beautiful gardens, like the kind of mansion that if you have to ask how much it costs, you can't afford it sort of thing. And that just kept going for a few blocks. And then you hit the Ronaldo campus, which is all this green, beautiful gardens, and the Rinaldi campus. The campus of Wake Forest was donated to the university by the Reynolds family, and this was their home originally. So the Rinaldi campus has an art museum and a village and shops. So it's very, very beautiful, and it looks very, very Tony and wealthy, I would say. Then as you drive past that, then you enter the gates to Wake Forest University. And I will have to say that the forest part of Wake Forest University is truly accurate. There's trees everywhere, and it's just a beautiful campus. The landscaping is fantastic. I don't know if you know this, Mark, but I'm a little obsessed with flowers. I can't grow them. I kill them, but I love looking them in other places. So I was in flower heaven when I was at Wake Forest. I was practically skipping around the campus with glee, looking at all the flowers. But it is a beautiful, beautiful campus. It is sort of not quite red. It's sort of a reddish, lightish orange brick. And it's done in the Georgian style. And it's got a quad. It's got a beautiful cathedral. And it's just really a beautiful place. So Wake Forest didn't used to be in Winston-Salem. Obviously, it used to be in Wake Forest. And they moved there, I think, in the 1950s when they got the donation from the Reynolds family. But Wake Forest started in 1833. And it was organized by the Baptist State Convention, and they called it the Wake Forest Institute. And it was really interesting because at that time, you went to class half the day, and the students and the professors were then required to spend half the day doing manual labor on the plantation of the school. And so it was kind of like a combo of a school and, manual labor program, I guess. And so in 1838, they decided the manual labor part was not so cool, so they abandoned that. It became more of a traditional college. University, in some ways, in the South, they were the first major private university in the South to desegregate in 1962, when they decided to accept Edward Reynolds, who was from Ghana. And in 1986, Wake Forest separated from the Baptist State Convention, and now they just have a fraternal relationship with it. One of the things that Wake Forest is truly known for is its academics. The students there call it Work Forest because the classes are hard and the grading is brutal. But they really do have a wonderful liberal arts program where you're sure, if you go there, to be able to learn all about the world and the thoughts around it. It's also got a lot of research. It's a research university, and it embraces the teacher-scholar ideal. So there's a lot of interaction in the classroom. Their materials, the presentation that they give they really push that you're going to be interacting a lot with your professors in the class. The class sizes are small, and you're also going to interact with them outside of the classroom in research or internship opportunities. They really want people to ask why. That is one thing that they really emphasize. They really want people to question ideas, beliefs, why they're doing what they're doing, and they feel that advances the study of knowledge. So it's a very rigorous place academically.
Yeah, I know that. I don't know if this is still true, but I remember some time ago when the average GPA for accounting majors was 2.6.
Right.
And that was a few years ago. So it may have changed because there are some schools that have had to adjust to their owners is probably not the right word, but tough grading just because there's been such blowback from students who feel as if they're just not confident that every grad school is going to understand our grading is so tough, and they feel like it's going to end up being punitive for them as they apply to, MBA programs or whatever. And so I don't know if that's still true, but I know that business is just really strong there, and finance is, very strong. Management, accounting, those kinds of majors are exceptional. Did you come across any of that in your research?
Yeah, economics is the most popular one, and then business and finance are also really popular. And those graduates go on to make quite high salaries. The average starting salary of a graduate in finance and financial management is $72,000 a year, which
high.
was a lot more than what I got when I got out of college.
Well, that's high even for that major, even nationally. That stacks up really well, even for that major in other markets.
Right.
So that is really good. And I can definitely attest to the pristine nature of that campus. It's definitely a very manicured campus, and But I remember sort of having that gobsmacked,
Yeah.
impression the very first time when I visited. And, you definitely can tell that there's wealth here. There's a preppy vibe that I picked up. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, typically when you're on a college campus, you're going to see kids dressed in all kinds of ways. And it could have just been the day I was there and the kids I saw, but pretty much kids looked like they just came out of, I don't know, an Abercrombie ad or whatever the young kids are wearing these days, the prep young kids. I've lost track.
Yeah, me too.
But, they looked clean cut, very neat. And that's what I'd say, like the campus is so neat. Like I didn't see a stray piece of leaf anywhere on that campus. And it was just beautiful. And they really had set it up very nicely to be like accessible during COVID. Like they took their plazas and they had like chairs or socially distanced with fire pits for everyone. I mean, it looked like the most upscale hotel that I could imagine. Because, I don't really stay at upscale hotels, but that I could imagine. And, I didn't see that sort of like little gritty, grungy vibe that you might get on a lot of college campuses. Like I went to look at a billboard because I love looking at billboards, and everything was completely straight and balanced and measured and put on perfectly on the billboard. No one just walked up and stuck something up there. They've clearly got someone manning those billboards.
Yeah, it has a strong culture, and I base that on students I've had that go there. It definitely, my impression is people love it or they don't love it.
Right.
And it just depends on, who it is. And that's why we always say it's so important to visit these schools. There is no substitute for a visit. Like I'm all for doing all these other types of research and I recommend that wholeheartedly. But a visit gives the feeling. And the feeling is important and feeling matters. And people should trust feelings and not think they're anti-intellectual.
Oh, well, you don't need to get me started on that, Mark. I could talk for hours about that. I 100% agree with you. And I hadn't been to visit a new college campus in a while, obviously, because of COVID. Yeah. So this is the first one that I stepped foot on that I hadn't been on. It just reminded me of how important that in-person visit is if you can do it. Because, I read about it before I went and watched the info session online, but it was no substitute for walking it, meeting the people, and just feeling the vibe of the place.
Yeah, the one thing that I have to admit, and I'm struggling to really get my pulse on with Wake Forest, and I probably need to have somebody come on and interview them, that a senior level person, and grill them with some hard questions, because if you look at their sort of demographics, they don't present very diverse, and like their Pell Grant numbers are low socioeconomically. And then their racial diversity for North Carolina is significantly less than you see in there. But when I've talked to them in the past, the admission officers in the past, they've really preached that pretty hard. In fact, I remember when they went test optional, it was maybe 06 or 07. I'm going by memory on that. It was around there. You know how I can remember these things? Like I moved to Atlanta in 09. So I put it. So I'm like, about how long was it before I moved, right?
Yeah, like when I learned that when I was freezing and shoveling snow in my driveway. Yes, it's all seared in.
Yeah, it's seared in. And so I know the conversations I had, they were really progressive about doing it. They from a standpoint of we need to diversify our student body. There's people that don't test well that we know can do extremely well here, and we're willing to put in the extra time that it takes to require quite a few essays. I mean, their application is not an easy application.
No, and they really love the interviews, and
yes, they
encourage them. And I think they used to start doing them like right after school ended, so right about this time for rising seniors. But now they're starting them August 1st. But they're already telling people like August 1st, you got to sign up for your interview if you're really serious about coming here.
Well, and there's a tip I know about them. Like, if you look at what they say about interviews on their website, it makes it seem like it's perfectly optional. It's perfectly optional. We will admit many students who don't have interviews, and I'm sure that's true because there are people that you can't get to for various reasons. But they clearly want you to interview.
Yeah.
And I would strongly encourage anybody interested in Wake to interview and not to look at sort of the website sort of PC talk of you can do it if you want, but you don't have to.
Yeah, and I think they've changed that maybe as a result of, everyone starting to realize they could do everything virtually. But the stuff that I saw said that they were evaluative interviews and that they are very strongly encouraged. And basically, if you want to come here, you've got to do this interview because we want to get to know you. We want to get to know what you're about. We want to make sure you're a good fit for us.
Yeah. And I respect what they've done. They have said, okay, we don't have test scores. So we're going to add, they never had the interview emphasis before when they were when they required test scores, but they've really beefed up their college specific questions too.
Yeah.
Did you come across any of that in your research?
They might change their essays for this next admission cycles, but these are some of the ones that they've used in past years. The first one is, how did you become interested in Wake Forest and why you're applying? So your typical why Wake Forest essay. And then there's one that says, help us get to know you better by responding briefly to these questions. As a part of my high school curriculum, I was required to read blank. I would have replaced it with another blank. The required book I was most surprised I enjoyed was blank blank. So they're really wanting you to fill them in about what interests you, what doesn't interest you, and be critical of your high school's curriculum. Tell us how a work of fiction you've read has helped you understand the world's complexity. And then there's a question that says, what piques your intellectual curiosity? So as you can see, these are hard questions to answer. They're not your boilerplate, college admissions essays that you can cut and paste other stuff into and send it off. They're going to take some time.
Yeah, I mean, Lisa, you know this because we've co-counseled together, but you remember, I will often use Wake Forest as an example when I'm with somebody of the amount of work they're going to have to do on these college-specific essays. And these are, like, if one school has 4 to 6, and these are not ones that are necessarily going to be one draft,
right?
You can see the amount of time that can go into the writing piece of the application.
Yeah.
And anytime a school requires something, it matters, because when they require it, they're creating work from themselves. They don't create work for themselves for something they don't see value to.
Right. Yeah. I think that it's really important to them. They stress it over and over. And these essays, they're not quite as avant-garde as the University of Chicago essays, but they
Who
are.
is? Who is?
I mean, that's their thing. But they are hard essays. I mean,
I know.
Trying to capture the complexity of human life with a novel in 800 words, that's a tough assignment, I think.
Well, and also some of them are shorter words, and sometimes people say, "Oh, good, it's not that many words." Well, you know what?
That's harder.
Yeah, it's harder. You have to be so efficient. You don't have time for wasted words.
No. Yeah, so I think they probably screen out a lot of people who aren't truly interested in Wake Forest just by making the application a little bit more challenging to get through.
Well, yeah, their colleges notice if they drop one college-specific question or if they add one, they can oftentimes see that reflected in the number of applications. And so those are intentional decisions. So they're making decisions. Okay, do I want to go for more of a concentrated group of students who really have put some time and thought into this? Or do I want to have that bigger pool that I can, start to recruit from? And individual schools literally change their mind from one year to the next.
Right.
One thing I noticed about Wake is this year I noticed they got noticeably more selective. I didn't have that many surprises this year with students I worked with, but I did get surprised a few times with Wake. I had a couple kids that were like probably the top 1% of their class that never got in.
Wow.
And in the past, Wake was selective, but to me, it went from selective to very selective this year in my experience with it.
Yeah, I think, the most recent data that I found was last year, and it was 31% accepted ED and 29% accepted regular decision. But I can imagine this year it's probably even higher. And you have to think that they've already screened out a lot of people with those essays. So, I mean, it's kind of it'd be a smaller percentage of all the people who are originally interested in the school than the 30% would suggest.
Yeah, to me, they were more selective. They felt a lot more selective than in regular. I'm talking about in regular.
Right.
ED schools love them some ED, and they'll gobble kids up. But I haven't. I'd be very curious to see when the final numbers come out.
Right. Absolutely.
And one thing I noticed really curious about is I know they have a pretty high percentage of students that are in sororities and fraternities, and they've definitely got a work hard, play hard culture.
Right.
And in some ways you respect that. You're going to work hard. You got to like let that steam out somewhere. It's not like, what I don't like is the play hard schools, because that means not graduating.
Yeah, but they're so much fun. I don't know. But it's expensive fun. So I see your point.
Well, North Carolina as a state is basketball centric, right? You're walking into basketball town there. And that's true whether it's Davidson, Wake Forest, North Carolina State, North Carolina Chapel Hill, you name it. It's not football centric the way Georgia is.
Right.
And it's like Kansas, Indiana, Kentucky, North Carolina. Those are the 4 big basketball states. And I know the Demon Deacons, I know that they bring the heat. I've heard as many as half the student body comes out to men's basketball games.
Yeah, I think people are really excited about those basketball games at Wake Forest. And I think that the student body is generally considered to be a little more on the conservative side than a lot of other campuses. And there's a really big emphasis on the Greek life. So like 60% of females and 40% of males are in a fraternity or a sorority. And what's interesting is I think they have maybe one house, but otherwise the fraternities or sororities are all kept within their housing system. So they'll have a floor, and their own lounge. And so that if you pledge into that sorority or fraternity, that's where you'll live in the following year. With Wake Forest, they require you to live on campus for the first 3 years. And most people elect to stay on campus the 4th year. And to be honest, when I left the campus, you could see on the other side of campus, it's a whole different Winston-Salem than in the Rinaldi campus. And I did not see a lot of anything within walking distance there. Maybe there was because, I have a terrible sense of direction, so I just missed it. But
can't help you with that one, Lisa. I'm just despicable.
Oh, no.
I think I've been late for a meeting with you once because I went to the store and I couldn't find my parked car. It was either you or somebody else. It happens at least once a year.
Yeah, that happens to me a lot. When Lily first went to sleepaway camp as a middle schooler, she's like, boy, Mom, I bet you're just going to be wandering around a parking lot for the next 3 weeks. Because I was like, Lily, where did I park? It's like, you're over there, 3rd car to the left.
So I have to tell you this. This happened to me in Rochester, New York. Freezing cold Rochester, New York. Get out of the mall. And this time I was actually with somebody else. We couldn't find the car. Hour and a half of walking around freezing. And then we had to have a security guard drive us, aisle by aisle. And that happened to me at the Philadelphia airport too once. I'm coming back from a recruitment trip. And this is before I realized you stay off site and you take those shuttles in, but I'm doing the economy parking at the airport, like a fool. And, it's just car after car after car after car. And that happened to me there too. And I got back at 12 a.m. I'm walking. I have all my stuff because, I also traveled with, in addition to your suitcase, and you have your display case, the pull-up board with, those pop-up displays. I'm carrying all this stuff and I finally have to get a security guard and drive me around. So anyway, I have some issues.
Yeah, that's the stuff of my nightmares. And unfortunately, the stuff of my reality too. So, but I didn't know that about you. So that's really scary. If there's like a podcast driving contest, we can only hope that Dave has a good sense of direction.
Well, the bad thing is Lisa and I are already talking about visiting some schools together, coming up in August. And this could be in North Carolina. This could be rough.
I thought you knew where we were going. Oh, my goodness. I think if I went to Wake Forest, I'd probably want to have a car if I could, because Winston-Salem is like a few miles away, the downtown, and they do run a shuttle 3 nights a week to Winston-Salem. And there is you can walk to the Rinaldi shops and restaurants, but it's not that big. I can imagine that getting a little old for kids after a while. So I was thinking I would probably want a car, and they did have a lot of parking on campus too. So I think that probably students have cars. When I was there, it was a Friday afternoon, so it wasn't super busy, but I saw a lot of kids on the quad doing study groups. So they're all sitting around studying for finals in groups, working on problem sets. They didn't seem stressed, but they seemed intent on what they were doing. And it's very different than some other college campuses I've wandered around where people were just kind of hanging out, really relaxed, and they weren't, doing quantum physics study sets.
Do you find, as a psychologist, your mind sort of just gets trained to pick up cues? And about that kind of thing, maybe in a way that somebody else doesn't, who's not in the business of like reading people all the time?
Perhaps, just because I talk to people all day long and I'm, always trying to read their nonverbals as well as their verbals. So, then I usually get a lot of confirmation. Like I can ask them, well, how does that make you feel? And then they tell me. So then I know like, oh, I was right or oh, I was wrong. So, yeah, I definitely would hope that I got a little bit out of that after doing this for so long.
One thing that's impressed me about Wake is they've got an incredible study abroad program.
It's one of the best ranked study abroad programs around.
Well, a really high percentage of students go. Like some years as many as 75.
That's what I was going to say, 70%.
Elon is that way too. You know that where Lily's at. They're always up there as one of the top schools for study abroad. But a very high percentage of people study abroad at Wake, and then they have some really cool partnerships. But it just feels to me like they've really beefed up their study abroad and offer some really impressive offerings.
Right. And I think that, a lot of times if you are a liberal arts institution, study abroad is kind of essential. I mean, if you're asking the question of why, nothing gets you to ask the question of why more than being in a different culture where they do things in a completely different way. And I remember going to France and just realizing all of a sudden and all at once what an American I was and how differently the French did it. And I just remember feeling lost, but kind of awestruck.
Was that part of your study abroad in school, or was that just your own travel?
Unfortunately, at the University of Chicago, none of us studied abroad. We didn't know that was a thing. But my parents got me a ticket to Paris for my graduation present. So a friend of mine from college, we backpacked around France for several weeks, and it was a great experience. Yeah,
that would be pretty cool. Yeah, good stuff. So anything else you want to share with us about Wake, Lisa?
Some other good programs are psychology, personal favorite of mine. Communications is another good program, which is a personal favorite of my daughter's. And my husband loves the economics and business and finance. So they pretty much hit all the people in the family here.
They really did.
They do, but they have a lot of really strong programs. I think that, to my impression of Wake, is it's a serious place. If you're a kind of person who wants to really learn and really engage in your academic life, but also have the opportunity to socialize and do all the college things, like you mentioned, the rah-rah at the basketball games, then this could be a good fit for you. I could see, like, if you were from an underprivileged environment coming into a place like that and not really knowing how to deal with it at first. I mean, it would be an adjustment.
So a question for you on that. How much of that do you feel would be because of the affluence of the place and feeling like you're surrounded by wealth? How much of it do you feel is the fact that people of color communities not as large as probably what people are coming from?
Right.
Or how much of it do you feel is like the culture is so it's got such a dominant culture that it may not feel like, it's that accepting to people that come from different cultures from that. Do you follow me? Because it's also
I'm going to say yes, and yes.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think number one, it's not like it's gaudy, but it's got an opulent, rich feel to it. I definitely felt like, I should have worn a little bit better clothes while I was there. In terms of the ethnicity, Wake prides itself as being a diverse campus because they say 30% of the campus population represents some element of diversity. In their freshman class, 2019-2020 freshman class, 70% were white, 12% Asian, 9% Hispanic, African American 5.4%, Native American 1%, and two or more races 4.6%. That being said, and obviously it's like just whoever was out on the quad that day, I didn't see a lot of kids of color. I saw mostly white, blonde kids.
Yeah, you know what I've learned? I've learned that most of the numbers that schools report like that, you almost have to take 5% off.
Right.
Because there are people that check boxes thinking that it may help them in the admission process. And you would never in a million years think that person was a person of color.
Right.
That's usually about a 5% factor.
That's interesting.
So when you see numbers, I can't tell you how many times, I mean, it's the norm, to be honest, where the numbers that are reported are different than the place feels after a visit, by about 5%.
Right.
So take that for what it's worth. Right. This is a general comment about most schools, not necessarily Wake. But I would say that if they're saying they're 30% people of color, and remember, they come up with these numbers based on self-reporting. That's based on self-reporting. And so I'm not saying that they're fabricating them. I'm saying that's self-reporting. I am saying that sometimes people fabricate.
Right.
You know, they're 1/16 this and they claim Native American. Like that happens. My anecdotal sense would say about 5 times out of 100.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You know, because how do you check that? You know, do you ask for their 23andMe report? I mean, that would just be very intrusive.
Well, one thing I will say is, this is just my experience. People have a tendency to think that automatically helps them in the admission office. And a lot of schools are not naive that people do that. And so they may get over in some cases with that, but in many other cases, that's not a recipe for you being seen as a diverse applicant. Like, they're not necessarily going to change the numbers and go away and erase what you said. But if you think that that's going to be a positive in your candidacy, there are a lot of schools that have their antenna up for that.
Yeah.
And you'll hear admission officers speak about that routinely. If you think just checking a box is going to get you some brownie points with us, you're very naive.
Well, I hope that's a warning to all those potential box checkers out there listening to this podcast. The other point I wanted to make is it's not hugely geographically diverse. You know, like 1/5 of their student body is from North Carolina. I mean, North Carolina itself is got a lot of diversity sort of in the state. And then New York, Florida, New Jersey, and Georgia. So you're not seeing a lot of people from California or Montana or Texas coming to Wake Forest. You're not getting that whole nationwide kind of mix right now.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, you know, it's so funny because this is my 22nd year doing this, and I'm thinking and reflecting. I've had quite a few students I've worked with go to Wake, but I've never really had anybody that would be under-resourced. So when you were asking that question, I wonder how somebody would feel. I can't draw off that in my experience.
Right.
The people that I've had have gone there, they mostly have not needed financial aid.
Right.
The ones that I've gone there. And I do notice that it doesn't come up that often if I'm working with West Coast applicants. Now, I'm not expecting Montana because I've never had anybody from Montana.
We're calling for you, Montana.
Is big. Yeah, but we're calling for you. Wyoming too. North Dakota too.
Don't forget South Dakota.
There you go. Let's throw them in there. But with California, I don't get that many people, and I do work with a lot of people in California. It's maybe my biggest state this year. I haven't checked, but it's probably 1 or 2. And I don't get that many people asking me about Wake. A little bit in the Midwest, but it definitely. But you know where I do get it a lot? Mid-Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely New England, and then Connecticut, Mass, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, that whole East Coast corridor. It's, remember, keep in mind, a lot of people vacation in North Carolina from the Mid-Atlantic and New England too. So there's a comfort in it, because that, quite honestly, it also would be true for other North Carolina schools as well, like where your daughter Lily's at. Like Elon is very, very popular in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, that region. You know, it's very, very popular. Whereas I don't have people in California or even in the Midwest asking me about Elon.
No, I mean, Lily tells me that when I told her I was doing this spotlight, she's like, oh boy, I know all these people who got rejected from Wake Forest and are now at Elon.
Similar applicant pool.
Yeah, no, they do have a lot of overlap, but you're right. I mean, there is a very big East Coast presence at both these schools. Wake Forest does say that they meet 100% of demonstrated need, although that does include loans. But as you say, we don't know how often that happens. They do offer some merit scholarships. They're not as many as other schools. I think Wake says in their literature that only 3% of admitted applicants are offered any kind of merit aid. They do have, some very competitive full ride scholarships that you can apply for, but you shouldn't bet the farm on it because they're very hard to get.
I know, but I've had people win them. I've had people win stamps. I've had people win Reynolds. Those are some different scholarships that they have.
Right.
And so they definitely have them, and they do tend to have less, but they some of the ones they have are very generous.
Right. If you hit them, you hit the jackpot, it seems.
Yeah, the lottery.
I also wanted to say that after I went to Wake Forest, I drove 40 miles and I went to Hanging Rock State Park and I went hiking. And That's one other thing that Wake Forest has for it is like it's very close to a lot of really beautiful places in nature. So I saw this beautiful waterfall, and then I climbed up this mountain to the Hanging Rock, but I couldn't quite see it because there were these 3 college girls, and they would not get off the rock. They kept singing this song. Like, I don't know if you know this song, Marcus. What does the fox say?
No.
I'm not going to sing it for you because it's very irritating. But they sang that for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay. So everyone experiences nature in their own way, but I'm leaving now. And then I climbed down the mountain and I saw there was another waterfall, but I was so tired. I drove my car across the parking lot to go to that trailhead and went to the 3rd waterfall. But it was beautiful. I mean, so you see, it has a lot of things going for it in terms of natural beauty. And Winston-Salem is, a city. It's got a lot of culture. They have their medical campus downtown. So there's quite a lot of things in the surrounding area to do. And that's why I said, I think a car would be great if you're at Wake Forest.
Well, and Winston-Salem's got a real budding music community.
Yeah, arts is huge.
And you've got North Carolina's, you got North Carolina School of the Arts close by, and they've got some music festivals and stuff. So that is something that's, that people can access if they love the arts and love music.
Right. So you've kind of got all of it. You got the arts, you got the nature, you got the really great classes. I mean, there's a lot to recommend it, but you might, if you're the kind of person who's super liberal and loves avant-garde things, this might not be the place for you.
Yeah, and I do also want to say that they have a strong pre-med program too.
Yes.
They do, because they've got the Wake School of Medicine right in downtown Winston-Salem, and I've had some people go there for pre-med, and they've definitely been pleased with the strength of the curriculum that they got. They feel prepared them well for med school.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's educationally, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better school, honestly, if you're interested in what, some of their highly ranked programs. I can't imagine, but it's just like whether it's a social fit for you or not. That's the thing.
Well, thank you, Lisa. This is great.
Oh, well, thanks. It was a lot of fun.
What's your next one? Is it Lawrence? I'm trying to remember.
I don't remember. You got to tell me so I can start working.
I think it is.
All right.
Yeah. I think it's Lawrence and Appleton, Wisconsin.
All right. So we're going up north.
Yeah, Lisa and I did a whole little year calendar where she's going to do 8 between, I think it was February and the end of the year. And so look forward to seeing you in about a month.
All right. Great. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Next week in the news, test optional admissions yields benefits. Inside Higher Education article by Scott Jasek. Our bonus content is where Mark discusses the timeline that parents should be thinking about when their kids are in elementary and middle school. Our interview is part 3 of 3, the final part, Vince Garcia, on what happened with admissions at UFC schools this year. And our college spotlight comes to you from San Antonio, Trinity University.
Hey, Dave, let's go back and singing our Meatloaf 2 out of 3 ain't bad, man. And we end that way. Now we don't have to scare anybody off because the episode's over. I'd made a promise to Anika 100 episodes ago not to sing again. But now that Anika's not here, I can take some liberties.
That's right. But leave a little of it, and it'll be interesting to get all the feedback and flack.
Yeah.
Please never sing again.
All right. See you next week.
Okay, no problem, buddy. I'll talk to you in a bit.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404 664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.